Some people say that it's justified. Other people are saying, wow, this shouldn't be happening at all. We want to know your thoughts. But tonight we are going through a strange situation. We had several guests. We had 5 pastors who were supposed to be here. They couldn't make it for some reason. And we also had several singers and musicians. They were going to really explode and have a great show tonight because we wanted to talk about what needs to happen, that is to bring peace, that is to people on the streets, that is to, I mean, how can we erase the division between law enforcement and people who, were disenfranchised in a sense out on the street? And so we want to talk about that tonight. And so what I've done, I've gone to people who actually play football, yes, football, on our studio lot, and they enjoy playing football a lot, and it's just something that they like to do. They throw a ball, catch it, and run, and tackle each other, and perhaps, Bob, you could join in on that exercise at some point when you visit, okay? This guy, by the way, is actually, I'm talking about Bob, he's in New York. He's a professor out of New York, very brilliant man. But we're going to start talking to these young people simply because I think they probably can say what needs to be said concerning this topic tonight better than we can. But before I bring them in, Bob, what are your thoughts?
Hey, I'm looking forward to tonight's little chat, and always enjoy it when we get input from people we've never heard from before, because they almost always bring something up that hasn't been typically brought up before, and gives us much better information to kind of chew on. So I'm looking forward to what our guests have to say. Definitely, absolutely.
We also have Daryl. He's in Texas, and he's coming in to the show as well. Say something, Daryl.
Well, back in my day, you might say, I remember a song called Give Peace a Chance. All we are saying is give peace a chance. And I'm ready to hear an updated view of this. I want to hear what these guys got to say. Looking forward to it.
I'm going to turn to my right. There is a gentleman sitting to my right. His name is Coleman, and perhaps he can state it best. In your mind's eye, what do you think needs to be done, that is, between law enforcement and the black community, law enforcement and all of us in the community? What needs to happen first?
Well, to be honest, my mother always told me, you can't have peace, you can't have certain things without prayer and without God. And I believe that's the only way things will really work.
So you're saying that if a person has God in their lives, if a person prays, that's a good step in the right direction.
Yes, sir.
Okay, that's good. That's good. What are your thoughts? And your name?
Jacob.
Jacob. Now, you like playing football.
Yes, sir.
Do you like to tackle people?
Absolutely.
I mean, it's violent, right?
Very.
Okay. You really like the violence, right?
Very much.
Okay. Coleman, does he like the violence too much? Not too much, okay. When I asked him about the violence, he really smiled, so it's crazy. I mean, it's like, yeah, I really like that stuff. Knock
All
them
in
on
good
their
fun.
ass, right?
Right.
Yeah, okay, so I've got a guy who's wanting to pray, and I've got another guy who wants to knock people on their ass. And so from time to time, isn't that the way that human beings are? 1 minute we're praying, the next minute we're knocking somebody on their ass?
Yes, humans are very dynamic in their feelings and their views towards things, and your views can change very fast based on your personal experiences. But personally, I think I think a lot of people base their judgment on this whole thing based off their personal experiences mostly. I think what we really ought to do is try to find the best statistics we can, Department of Justice, whatever, and try to really look at, how many people a year are killed by cops as opposed to how many cops are killed a year by people. And I understand that a lot of cops in a lot of confrontations, they feel very nervous because it only takes a split second to go from an unarmed suspect to an armed suspect, and they can lose their lives just that fast. But I know that no matter what color your skin, no matter what class or race or gender or whatever, if you can't simply obey very clear and precise orders from a police officer, you are putting yourself at risk. That's really the last thing I would say to anybody who has a problem with cops and all that. The whole F the police culture is they're putting their lives on the line.
What do you mean, the F the police culture? What does that mean, F the police?
Well,
It's all right to say that on this show.
well, I mean,
Oh, you're dating back to the 90s.
well, but it comes back. It comes all the way up till now. It's making a comeback. NWA and this whole gangster rap culture. You know, we hate cops. You know, we don't want cops in the hood. But really, those are the communities they need to protect the most, and they have the hardest time protecting them because that's where their lives are at risk the most because of the hate we're talking about. Which is why I agree with Coleman. We need to turn to God. We need to pray, and we need to realize that no matter what uniform you're wearing, no matter how you're dressed, you're still a human being, and you have to look out for yourself and your own. And until we can understand that and understand each other better, we're going to see more and more violence, I believe.
Do you agree with him, Coleman? Absolutely. Give him the microphone so he can speak. Okay, he's knocking people on their ass, and yet he's wanting to pray. I get that. He's trying to paint a picture as if when a law officer says stop, we should stop.
I believe we should stop, but it depends on what is going on at the moment. Well, let me reword that. I believe we should stop unless the law officer is taken advantage of in a certain way, such as you've seen other examples of on TV and social media and television. On some law officers, they're taking advantage of their job, but I believe they're the ones that should be, out of law enforcement.
That's good. What say you?
It does all depend on the situation the officer is in. I do agree with Coleman. We do need to pray and pray for the best for the people and officers that do give their lives every day. And it does take a split second to make that call if, an officer is going to have to take that person down, or if they're just going to use deadly force with a real gun or use temporary force with a taser. It all depends on a quick judgment, a split second decision to choose which one they're going to have to use. So I do agree with, both of them on praying and, taking that split second, with the violence. It's a violent moment on if they're going to take which decision they're going to end up picking. Handgun to put them down for good, or taser to subdue it, and then find out if that was the right choice. It all depends on the situation the cop is in at the moment.
Every time that I go out on the studio lot and you guys are playing football, we're talking about whites, we're talking about blacks, we're talking about Hispanics, correct? You guys are always getting along. I mean, I don't see any racism out there. I mean, if you guys get hot, it's not over color. I mean, you guys love one another, and yet you're willing to knock each other on each other's ass, and you really like that.
We all,
But my point is, there is a lot of hate out there. There are officers who are bigots. There are a handful who actually dislike people because they are of a different color. Would you agree with that? And, in my estimation, those people are, just a handful in all of the law enforcement. I'm very much a fan of law enforcement. My son is actually in the military, and he's in the military police, and he's as high as you can go as far as that's concerned. Very proud of him. But my point is, I think that in every modality, you're going to have some people who just have problems. And you guys seem to be able to, tackle one another and get violent with one another in a game, and yet I continue to see that you guys have ultimate respect for each other. How does that work?
Well,
I mean, you guys are not out there on your knees praying and saying, "Oh, touch him, Jesus, touch him." You're not doing that kind of stuff. What you're doing is you're just being human beings and you're loving one another. It's not about, hey, you're black, you're white, or, you're a funny color white or whatever. You know what I'm saying? It's nothing about that. Why are you guys getting along so well?
Well, we all grew up with each other. We all went to the same high school, and through playing football and being at high school, we all had the respect for each other. And even though that some of the times, after football, we all go our different ways on what we're going to do afterwards and what we're going to do after the game, or if we're still going to hang out with each other, we still have, no matter what, when we leave that field, we're still going to be friends. No matter, and we might yell at each other, we might get angry, somebody might walk off the field, but the next day we might be back out there. We're all still friends. We just need to, calm down and find a way to blow off some stress.
So you're saying that you guys have a connection, and in a sense you're refusing to be disconnected, correct? And do you think that some people in some communities feel disconnected from law enforcement?
Like I was saying, in the high crime rate areas, the inner cities in Chicago and Baltimore and Jacksonville and places like that, the hood, yes. They need law enforcement more than they realize, and unfortunately they're not getting it because the officers feel their lives are threatened in that area. And I think there wouldn't be so much bad blood if, and I don't want to say all police are corrupt or anything, but if the ones that were bad weren't protected by the ones that are good, there would be a lot less blood, because we would have those people stripped of their duties and out on the streets, and they wouldn't be able to harm anyone. But unfortunately, that's not how it happens. Usually they get a paid leave, they maybe get fired, and then get moved to the next county to abuse the next person's civil rights. And so it's really, it all goes in a big circle where, each point of it we have to fix one by one.
Right.
There's problems on both sides.
I've got a curiosity question, because, you guys really do sports a lot. Would it help if law officers, like in Chicago, if they said, hey, this weekend we want to play football or basketball, if they got involved in the community and they started, getting to know one another? You said just a few minutes ago, we grew up together. We go to the same school. We know one another. I mean, in a sense, that's a very warm thing to say, You feel, connected. Would it be true that maybe that's what law enforcement needs to start doing, and people in the community need to start reaching out to law enforcement reaching out to them, so people can come together to where they can have some, commonality?
Now, there's when you say reach out to the community, there's different ways. Yeah, some may to get together, play sports. I do know some cops do that, and I've seen other cops that go out and do hunting, like other different types of activities. Because I actually go out hunting every year, and I actually know a few officers themselves that say, well, hunting actually relieves stress for them. Even though they don't reach out to certain communities, they do reach out to all the people that do go hunting. And there's different races that go out there to go hunting, and I've seen officers, be friendly with, everybody and everyone that's out there, and I don't ever see nothing wrong. I don't see them getting violent with nobody, or, them saying anything wrong to nobody. We're all just out there, just enjoying the thing we love to do, like hunting or playing basketball or playing any type of sport or doing any type of activity. I've seen cops play I actually know a few cops that will actually come out and play football, like not with the guys right here, but if on base, I've seen a few officers go on base and play, football with, a couple old military buddies.
Right.
It's all different, on who they want to hang out with. Like, hey, they want to hang out with military buddies one week, or they want to hang out with somebody that's not on base. It just all depends on, how it works around their schedule and when they're able to come out and play sports or do some type of activity.
Bob, I want to turn it to you. Do you have a couple of questions for these young men? Because they've got to go back out there and start knocking each other on their ass. I mean, they're
Right.
anxious to
Yeah.
do that.
Well, listening to the conversation so far, I do have a couple of responses. One is I would certainly be of the opinion that police officers often, very often, don't know the law, and they are often behaving in a manner that is not in keeping with the law. And I do believe that citizens have the right to question a police officer as to whether or not he is actually applying the law. And I know that as a white person from a middle class neighborhood, I have certainly been pulled over by a police officer who I believed was incorrect in his assessment, and have had the complete freedom to say so and to even refuse to comply with what it was he was attempting to do. And I did that without feeling that I was in any danger. They certainly didn't like it, but as far as I'm concerned, that's not my problem. So I'm not one of these people who believes that you should just obey the clear commands of the cops. Cops need to be giving not only clear commands, they need to be giving lawful commands, and they need to have just cause. Now, that doesn't mean that I think that we have every right to, cross-examine them and question their every effort, because you can do that ad nauseum. But I do think that we do have a culture of police officers who very often think, well, I'm in control here and I've got to maintain control and I'm going to do whatever it takes to keep that control. And I think that creates a problem, particularly when they're in a situation where anybody in that situation anticipates there could be some tension of some sort, including but not limited to racial tensions. So I do think that the police officers are very, very much the ones who are the professionals in all of those encounters, and they're the ones whose training needs to be aware of the various different attitudes that they will run up against, because when a civilian of any race, of any strata of society economically is pulled over, they are not professional citizens. They're just people, and they're responding the way they do for various reasons. I also recognize that police officers have a need to protect themselves. They really do. But I don't really believe that their split-second decisions are anywhere near as risky as they sometimes say in their responses. I would also, that becomes obvious from the fact that they are often spooked by circumstances and situations that prove not to have been dangerous. And also, sometimes it is amazing to me the absurdities to which it can go, and people won't be honest about how absurd it is, such as, well, he reached inside of his pocket, so I shot him. He might have pulled out a gun. Well, he reached inside of his pocket, but the time to shoot is when he pulls the gun out, not when he reaches into his pocket. And there are other things that the people do that I think indicates that, as far as I'm concerned, the professionals are overly worried or spooked and not behaving in a professional manner. They're not trained to handle this, and they don't want to even face the risk. And I am just like a soldier who's in the military is not there to ask to question their superior officers. They're there to obey the commands, because they're not allowed to be privy to the strategy or the reasons why they're ordered to do what they do. It's not the same with police officers. However, they are hired to serve and protect. It is not their job to make sure they get home tonight, although we certainly hope they do. They are there knowing that they are in a job, unlike the military, who have a job that can often be absolutely in a risky situation. When you're in a war zone, there's people out there who are trying to kill you. But when you're a police officer, there are people out there who might try to kill you. And that's a very different situation, and it calls for, I believe, a very different kind of constraint. I really think that we have a very serious problem that has to be dealt with honestly. I don't think we need to throw the police officers under the bus, but I do think that if the police officers are not going to be honest about the things that they're doing, that this is only going to get worse. And this is easy for people who, like me, are white, middle class, well-to-do. I don't have to worry about it because chances are, no matter how bad that gets, it's not going to be bad with me. So it's no skin off my nose. But it's not my nose I'm thinking about right now. I think that there are a lot of police officers who do not mean to be in any manner racist, but don't realize the degree to which they are not thinking with the same mindset when dealing with people from different races, particularly if they're dealing with races that they don't hang out with or know very well or interact with. They're going to be a little extra nervous. They're going to judge situations differently. It is amazing the kinds of things that sometimes a white person is able to get away with in not complying and not end up being shot, taken alive, and some of the most minuscule things that a person of color does and ends up being shot immediately. So I think that if we're going to be honest about this, let's recognize that there is not an equitable context that's going on, and that context is lacking in equitability for reasons that are more sophisticated than just, oh, well, they hate people of color. I don't think that's true. I think that they just are not aware of their own response in the situation, and it gets worse. There was an interesting comment made there that I think is interesting because a similar dynamic happens with bad teachers. Many times a teacher is involved in doing something very wrong, very illegal, and instead of turning it into a big thing that might scandalize the school, the teacher gets fired, gets a letter of recommendation, and they just go over to another school district and do it all over again. And that kind of stuff certainly needs to stop. Other things that I noticed was that we have what we think of as high crime rate areas. But I think that our statistics are way off. Social polls tend to indicate that white people use certain illegal drugs at the same rate that people of color do. But I'm afraid that the arrest records and the so-called data that shows high crime areas indicate that even though white people may use those drugs at the same rate, they're certainly not investigated or looked at or considered, and therefore they don't get arrested as often or sentenced as often, and the statistics for the crime rates in their area are not going up. But that's not because the statistics are being kept based upon actual drug use or actual crimes being committed, but rather crimes being pursued. And so I think it's skewed. I don't think the crime rate is as off as it is sometimes perceived. Not only that, but I think that there are people where it's more of a poverty issue than a racial issue, although I think that the poverty issue and the racial issue are very much intermixed. People who are impoverished are far more desperate and far more likely to be nervous when around people of authority whom they feel do not give them a fair break, a fair chance, and who aren't aware of the fact that those fair breaks and fair chances are not even being offered. And as a result, the tensions are going to be higher there, and the incidents of poor judgment are going to be higher. And I think to a degree that needs to be understandable and even regrettable. But I think this is a very serious issue, and it's not going to go away by simply talking about it. There's not been a single profession in the world that has ever been successful at policing itself. And I think that that's also true of the police. I favor bringing in civilian review boards whenever a police officer is accused of doing something that isn't proper. I really think that that needs to be not just an internal investigation, but a community-based investigation. We need people from the communities, people from even the poor communities, voicing their opinion and their response to the behaviors that are now being held in question. I think that would be helpful. I certainly believe we need law and order. We definitely do. And there's a number of people out there who are just excellent police officers, and I've known some of them. But I've also known a couple of police officers that I I pray to God that they don't run into very often people who don't know how to deal with people as difficult as they are, you know,
Can I
it's
jump in
just
here for a minute, Bob? These guys are anxious to go out on the field and knock each other down. And just before they go, I wanted to ask one more question, if I might hand the microphone to this gentleman. Have you ever ran into a racist?
A racist?
No?
Never ran into a racist.
That's great. So, in other words, this isn't something that you're having to deal with directly, correct?
No, sir. I actually went to a private school and I grew up with a bunch of, well, actually, this guy, a bunch of white people, and there were like 2, 3 colored people in the class, and we always got along with each other. We always respected each other. My mom always instilled it in me. Color doesn't mean anything to anybody. It should just be the thing on the inside, and that's it.
So this isn't even an issue with you guys, okay? And so, in a sense, talking about racism is for other people who have the problem. Okay. Okay, go ahead. You said that you ran across a racist?
I did run across a racist. I was on vacation in California, and my cousin happens to be, well, not my cousin, my uncle happens to be, God, I forget I think he's Mexican. And me and him were just walking down the street, and a white gentleman said, "Why are you hanging out with a bean eater?" I said, "Hey man, this is my uncle. This is family." He said, "Have you seen the color of your skin?" I said, "Yeah, I'm white and he's Mexican. Doesn't mean, he's family. It doesn't matter, what what the race of your skin is. If that's who you consider family, that's family. You me and him to come from different bloodlines. It doesn't matter, who the father is. He's family. My grandfather married his mom. That makes him part of my family, and I'm gonna accept him. Doesn't matter, it doesn't matter race or gender. I'm gonna accept it no matter what. I'm not gonna be racist because you choose to be. I'm gonna be. I choose to accept everybody for who they are, and they're all equal. Racist or not. I choose. Everybody's equal in my eyes. If some people want to live that life, that's the way they're raised up. Not everybody's raised the same way as you. Everybody's different on how they're raised.
Do you think that we have the ability to erase that kind of hate?
We do. In my eyes, I do believe we can erase it, but it's how the generation that they're being raised and who they're being raised around, as that's how they're going to grow up. I actually do have a friend that his father is actually a white supremacist, a general in the white supremacist, but he chooses not to live that life. He chose to live, see everybody equal. He didn't choose to live his father's lifestyle. He chose to be, let everybody be equal. Even though he can't bring nobody around to his house, he just chose, that's why he never
Okay.
lived it.
Now, I understand that you guys want to get out there and play football, but I've got this one final question. I think I said the other question was final, but it really wasn't. I lied, okay? There are a lot of people driving around Pensacola, and I say a lot. There are some people driving around Pensacola with these big rebel flags. You know what I'm talking about? These Confederate flags waving and all of that. That really bothers me. And the reason that it bothers me, it has to do with the vice president of the Confederacy. If you'll read a speech that he gave, he said that whites were superior to blacks. And when you study the Constitution of the Confederacy, it's very bigoted, it's very racist. My question is, what do you feel like when you see that rebel flag being flown by so many people here in the South?
That flag I actually have tattooed on me. It's not because it's a racist flag. It's a rebel flag. It means you fight for what you believe in. I have it tattooed on me, and it says heritage, not hate. It's a way of life. People live to choose. I got it due to the fact when I was younger. The reason I got it when I was younger is because I was always fighting. I was always fight for what I believed in, and I always, took a chance on, yeah, I'm going to fight for my rights. I'm going to fight for the right reason, not because it's a racist flag. So
Okay, so you're saying in a sense that you've repurposed the meaning of the flag, because the flag initially was to represent a certain mindset, and it was very racist.
actually, I've done the history on some of the flag. It's actually not. It wasn't designed to be a racist flag. It's actually some people took it to be a racist flag. Others consider it as a.
How can you have the vice president of the Confederacy saying that white people are superior to blacks and that not be a racial issue?
That was his choice on the way he said that, and that's the choice he chooses to live by.
But it's not just his choice, but in the Constitution of the Confederacy, it actually states that it was legal to enslave black people. I mean, come on, you've got to give me a break on this. Yes.
Do we know how many blacks owned slaves in the South, specifically free blacks that owned slaves? Was that because of white supremacy or because slavery was simply legal like it was in 75% of the world at that time? America was simply the first country to institutionalize the end of slavery rather than allowing the institution of slavery to continue. And I understand the South was fighting to keep slavery alive, and that maybe some of the people in that fight were white supremacists, but it was more about being able to have slaves than it ever was about white people being better than black people. At that time in the world, the Africans on the Gold Coast were the cheapest.
Okay, but would you agree with me that slavery is wrong?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I believe slavery is one of the worst things mankind has ever seen, but
Right.
we have to face the fact that only in the past 200 years have we really brought it down to a number low enough that, we can actually say, okay, half the world's not enslaved right now. And a lot of the world, it still is. You're right. Under communism and things like that, you're a slave to your government. It's not, slavery is just not just the plantation. Everybody that ever lived in the USSR was a slave technically. So,
See, I'm an old guy, and I was riding down the road years ago, and the guy sitting to my right, he was black, a lot older than me, okay? And he started crying. He grabbed my hand because he was full of fear. Mm-hmm. He was abused. His father was a slave, okay? And, when you get to know people who have been through slavery, that is in their family. In other words, I met a person, we did a documentary years ago with a gentleman who was raised to where he would never look at a white person directly in the eyes. When we first started doing the documentary, he would never look me in the eye. And I said, hey, listen, I love you. And I would go up and hug him. And that was odd to him. And finally, it clicked. He said, a white man actually loves me. And we got to be the best of friends, and it was wonderful. But I guess my point is, I like being sensitive in this kind of context. I would rather say, if I have a flag or whatever, if I have a symbol that is making people feel uncomfortable, I would rather get rid of it. Would you agree with that?
I personally, if you have a belief, express it. I don't care if I'm offended. I don't care if anybody else is offended. This is the United States of America. That's why we have the First Amendment. We're supposed to be offended every day.
I understand we have rights, but I'm talking about if, I have grandchildren, I have children, and one of the things that I practice as a grandfather and a father, if I do something that makes them feel uncomfortable, you know what I'm talking about? And for instance, if I come out and in front of their friends and I start playing, let's say, music that I like, and it makes them feel uncomfortable, I'll turn my music off out of respect for them. And so I would rather let my grandchildren and my children play the kind of music that they're comfortable with. In other words, do you see where I'm coming from? I want people to feel good about who they are, and sometimes I have to take the back seat. And so, I don't know. I'm very concerned that we are not dealing with all of the aspects of why people feel disenfranchised, why people feel put down. And I'm so thankful that you guys came and shared your heart. Why don't you share your final thoughts, and let's, you guys can go play football.
Well, my final thoughts about this is I believe that we all have to eventually, later on down generations, we all have to teach our kids the right way. Just like we said before, we have to always instill it in them. We have to lead them the right way. We have to raise up a generation that's going to lead and not fall behind and stick with past things. They always have to stay forward and keep them going on.
That's good. That's good. Thank you guys for coming our way. Can I have a big hug? Got late. Come here. Oh,
22 and I feel old.
we love you guys. You guys go knock each other down. Okay.
Mine too.
Have fun. May God bless. Thanks for having us. Yeah. Okay, Bob, these guys are going to go back and play football. What you were saying was so meaningful, but I wanted to make a point because with my grandchildren, I don't want my grandchildren feeling like, oh, wow, Grandpa is playing some country western music and I don't like that crap. I will actually try to I will bend over backwards to give them the time to where they can invest more of their time in the kind of music that they like. Does that make any sense?
Well, since you're not talking about the Beatles, yeah. I, I'm of the parental philosophy that you do need to teach your children to live and let live, which means I certainly don't want to do anything to deliberately show them I have the power over you, and so you're just going to have to put up with what I can do, and I don't have to put up with anything you can do because I have the power. I wouldn't want to do that, but I would want them to know that that in terms of personal comforts and issues like that, that there's give and take. And this is easier when you have more than one child because because they'll have more give and take between each other. Whereas if you have only a single child whose parents try to favor the concerns of the child, end up spoiling that child, and that child grows up feeling entitled. So I think that there's perhaps a balance, but I would agree that the overall concern should be to make sure that we're not damaging the developing child. Definitely. Yeah.
I really, I don't know, I've had to rethink a lot of things, and I remember when my father, really wanted me to learn certain doctrines, namely in the church. In fact, it was a requirement. And I think that it would have been better if he would have given me a little bit more room to be me rather than being something that I was taught to be. In other
Right.
words, I
Because you have to
felt
think for
like
yourself, no matter what. Right?
I beg your pardon?
You have to be able to think for yourself.
True.
No matter what, because if you're thinking the way somebody else wants you to think simply because they're requiring it of you, you're not really thinking.
Well, what I became was a parrot. I was a very good parrot. I mean, I could tell you X, Y, and Z because I was indoctrinated, and that's my point. I think that until we become, in a sense, sensitive to the issues. In other words, so many people here in the South are, waving that rebel flag, and I'm finding that so many people are repurposing the rebel flag. However, I'm an old guy, okay? And to me, it's somewhat black and white. I mean, come on. There was nothing about the Confederacy.
Also, I mean, it wasn't worth getting into an argument about, but
not at all.
But the flag that is currently used as the so-called Confederate flag is not the flag that was actually used by the Confederates during the war. That was a flag that was developed as the war had been coming to an end by people who wanted to continue the philosophy, as far as I'm aware of, anyway. So, I mean, if you do a history of Confederate flags, they had a few different renditions of it, and in fact, because the Confederacy was formed as quickly as it was, and because the war happened so quickly, I don't think that the South, that was part of the Confederacy, ever really, I'm not sure, I don't think they ever really got together and unified as to just what was their flag.
Do you remember when
But
we did the show when I was down at the 17th Street Bridge, when they
Mm-hmm.
had the Confederate flag all over the bridge? In fact, they had, all kinds of rednecks out there flying that flag. Do you remember that show?
I do.
Okay.
Yeah,
Now,
you had some fun out there.
yeah, we were out on location, and these guys were saying, I'm not a racist. I'm not bigoted. And right as the show ended, they were out there calling me the N-word, saying that I was an N-word lover and all kinds of stuff like that. And I was going,
Can I say
I
something
was
about
pulling my
racism?
hair out. I said,
Yeah.
do what?
Let me say something about racism that I think is important to understand. Number one, you can never know what the real thinking, real values, and real intention is of another human being. You can never know that.
That's true.
It's not possible. Therefore, you will never know anybody ever and know them to be a racist. What you will, racism is demonstrated not by the events that occur, but by the statistics of the aggregate total of events. When it turns out that more often than not, there's a difference in the way you treat a black person from the way you treat a white person in identical circumstances and similar parameters, well, there's something going on there, But in any given moment, anybody who's racist, very few people who are racist are thinking that there are some, but very few people are thinking, well, I just hate them niggers. They don't think that way. They have honest reasons that they perceive as to why this circumstance is different. And so they need to behave differently because the circumstance requires it. Has nothing to do with the color or anything like that. And yet, when you look at the overall aggregate total of events and interactions, that seems to be the one highly correlated aspect of the parameters involved. And so racism is demonstrated by the statistical occurrence of it rather than any particular single event. It's difficult unless the person who's racist actually is adamantly and self admitting to their racism. Oh, I hate them people. I tell you, I hate them, every single one of them. And there's some people who are that way. But the most powerful and most pernicious racism is something that exists within people who are not really aware of the fact that it's a dynamic operating within them.
Daryl, what say you?
Well, I was just thinking about something that I made reference to some guys I was working with this week. I don't even remember why it came up, but it was just a thought I had. It's been a little while back, but there was an issue about the names of some of the NFL teams, one in particular anyway, the Washington Redskins. And I had the thought, it was just came out of nowhere, so to speak, but I think it's significant to bring up. The issue was, should they change the name? And there was a pretty good controversy about it at the time, but it seems to have gone away. And I couldn't help but wonder if someone were to come along and name a team the Darkies, would that fly? I don't think it would ever be allowed. Now, I say that kind of tongue in cheek, but also to, what about other races? So much of the time it's a black and white thing, but, there's a lot of races. And I think somehow or another we need to find a balance of the way we approach one another as human beings, because there's such a variety, different shades, different cultures, so many things involved. Find a way not to be so oversensitive at the same time. So it's like, to me, that there needs to be a balance to where we can all express ourselves without being so easily offended, and yet at the same time do our best not to be offensive, and find a working balance.
Sorry. One thing I think is important to recognize is that racism is an attitude. It's not a form of behavior necessarily, unless it's an institutionalized form of behavior. And I say that because, any word can be used as a term of endearment or a term of denigration. This is true. I mean, you know what it's like to have a bunch of guys together, and along comes somebody who they haven't seen in a while. Hey, Joe, you asshole, where you been all these years? And nobody's offended that he's being called an asshole. And the reason is because there's something about the context in which that nobody's really calling him an asshole. There's in friendly encounters among men, there are many times when they talk in just that way. So I would want to avoid putting racism into the forms that people might rely on. And when it came to the issue of like the Washington Redskins, once it becomes an issue, I think that we do start to develop a certain social inertia where we have to be sensitive to it. But I guarantee you, I seriously doubt that any sports team out there, that when they decided to come up with a name and they used a name that referred to an Indian tribe or something, that I doubt any of them were thinking, well, let's make fun of the Indians with our name. No, I doubt that that's what they were thinking. And I think that there's also plenty of history to indicate that that Native American Indians have had a rough time of it trying to get their rights, get to be acknowledged with some of the actually even sovereign rights that they have, as some of them are Indian nations, and that we have not really treated Native Americans at all well. But it doesn't mean that everything that we have done with them has been bad. However, I think there's plenty of history to show that there were some times when Native American Indians were trying to get together and dealing with PR people, trying to see what can we do to improve our appearance in public. And from what I've been able to dig up, they decided that they would consider a lot of those sports teams as being inappropriately racist. And from what I have seen, they started actually going to college campuses and getting the Native American students riled up. And the initial response of many of those Native American students when they found out that that this was racist was more of a, oh, really? And so they turned it into an issue. And I think once it became an issue, then it is an issue. But I really think that unfortunately was an attempt that backfired and then just blew up into just a bunch of very difficult, hard feelings where there was a lot of accusations going on both ways. I really don't think that there was as much racism going on as was accused. But I also think that that the people who are Native American Indians have plenty to complain about the way that they are treated when it comes to various other things. So I mean, I say that to say this is a complex circumstance and situation where we are accusing people of being racist when they're not, based upon their form, and yet there are people who are racist and seem to be able to get away with it in the way that they overall are able to treat these people as individuals, or when it comes to extending to them opportunities of business, opportunities of education, opportunities to get ahead, and opportunities to be our friend. So I really see the issue as extremely complex and volatile, and so it's just a tough thing, and I don't think it's easy to be clear-headed about it. And I also think that if you're going to try and be clear-headed about it, you're going to find yourself being accused of being racist by people who are trying to be far more confident in how they understand it. Yeah, so even there, we're going to have trouble as people argue with about, who's the real racist here? And it degenerates into that kind of conversation. But bottom line, we need to be interacting with each other. We need to know of each other's hopes, dreams, pains, and we need to have genuine development of empathy between us and any other race, or we will be people who, even inadvertently, unwittingly, and without realizing it, will behave in racist ways. And so I think that we earlier in the program mentioned connection. Dr. Jones mentioned connection. It is so vitally important. You can never treat anybody as the human being they are if you don't know them as a human being, if you haven't experienced them as human. You can't do it. I think it's even psychologically impossible. It's not because you're a bad person. It's because that's part of how human beings learn to treat other people like human beings. They get to know them. And so, bottom line, we need a connection. We need to be connected to people. We need that connection because without it, you just will naturally not consider the people you're disconnected from, those other people. You will not consider their problems or ills or complaints as having anything to do with what's as important as your complaints. It's just human nature.
I'm very, very thankful for these young men. In fact, we had quite a few people in the studio, that is from the football that's being played right outside. But they were a bit shy. And so, when they said, "Oh,
I'm glad
wow,
they're friends."
yeah.
Yeah.
But my point is, these guys get out there and they get extremely rough. Guys like us, we couldn't handle that. But they have a marvelous time. They don't have to have referees or anything like that. They don't have to have anyone settling everything for them. They are just good friends. And one of the things that we have done for years, we have provided lots of lighting. It costs us quite a bit of money every month just to provide the lighting. We just put in new huge LED lights out there so they can play football. And so college players, all kinds of people from everywhere, it seems, in this area come to play football on our big lot. And so we do enjoy the fact that that's a place where people can feel good and connect. It was July the 4th, I believe it was. We had lots of people out there shooting off fireworks, and it was a wonderful venue. People just feeling as if they could connect. That was powerful. And so I don't know. I want to continue to have this conversation. I'm disappointed that the pastors didn't show up. We had some holiness pastors coming our way. They are very, very, very strict. That is, when it comes to doctrine. That is, when it comes to behavior. And so I wanted to hear what they had to say. In fact, most of you guys know me. I would rather take the time to look through someone else's glasses to see where they're coming from. And so I wanted to see what they had to say. We also had a small group of people coming our way tonight who were going to do many, many songs, and they failed to show up simply because something came up, and they did apologize. And so hopefully we can get them back on the show. But I think it was a wonderful conversation anyway. I think that we need to start talking to just more people off the streets. I think they might have better answers than our politicians. Our politicians seem to be fueling the problem instead of curing the problem. And so I don't know. I'd like to see what we can do about this, sociologically speaking. With that said, why don't you guys say some powerful things that would make our audience go, wow, I want to come back and watch the place again. And I'm simply going to bow out of here. And hopefully everybody's noticing the bar in the back. We're raising the bar here at the place, and we want to raise it quite high because we really believe that humanity needs to be respected, loved, nurtured. Being a humanist is a very, very important thing here. Bob, what are your thoughts?
Well, I'm glad we had this. Peace matters. It really does. And I don't think we're very good at it. In fact, if you look at the time, the effort, the study, the money that goes into things that aren't peaceful, and compare that to the time, effort, money, discipline, study that goes into what is peace, I think that we have to be honest about the fact that we're not really serious about peace. Oh, we'd like to have it, but it's not that we don't really care. I think that we're still lost in the paradigmical error of thinking that, well, peace is what happens when we stop fighting. No, 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 no. Peace is a proactive dynamic that exists between people who are very deliberate about their connection with each other. And so peace is not just the absence of hostility. It's far more than that. We're a long ways away from where we need to be with that. Peace does matter. I think, unfortunately, the human race technologically is getting to the point that if we don't learn how to be peaceful, we could be our own undoing, create our own extinction. And we need to learn what it means to truly honor each other. And I don't think we've learned that yet. By the way, you mentioned the politicians. I think that these movements depend upon people loving each other and getting together, regardless of what the politicians are saying or doing. This requires a movement. I'm not waiting for the government to solve our problems. I want us to be engaged actively in solving these social problems, just as people. That's what I think. It requires a movement of people. Legislation is helpful. And we've had a lot of civil rights legislation that was very essential. But what really changes things is when people as a general population change and shift in the way that they deal with each other.
That's beautiful. Daryl, final thoughts.
Well, tonight represents for me one of those moments that helps define why I want to be a part of NCG. When we have young men such as these on a show that say what they say unrehearsed, no one scripted, and no one said, here's what you need to say. And some of the things they said just touched my heart, that they grew up together. And I get the sense, maybe it's just me, but I get the sense that they don't even really notice the difference when it comes to color. I mean, they're friends, and that's first and foremost. And it sounds like you would have to force them into the issue of recognizing they're a different color, and therefore there needs to be some differences, exceptions made of some sort or another. And to me, if this is what we saw when we turned on the news, if this sort of scenario is, and I'm convinced that it's more common than not, people working together peacefully, living together peaceably, caring about one another, being friends. But that's not what we're bombarded with. We're bombarded with all the againstness. And, when I'm just saying that when I see something like I saw tonight, it warms my heart. It makes me want to let the world hear some of what we hear at times like these.
That's awesome. That's awesome. With that said, we're going to bow out of here, and hopefully you can find it within yourself to share a bit of peace with people. In other words, your understanding of peace. peace matters. It really does. Black lives matter. When people are disenfranchised for a long period of time, they need to be thought of as special. I remember when I was young and I didn't feel special. I remember the day when I started feeling extremely special. My wife made me feel that way. That was a wonderful day. And so for those of you out there who don't feel special, hopefully tonight you'll be able to look in the mirror and say, I am special. Thank you for your time.